Okay, welcome everyone. Since I will probably forget if I don't do it right now, even though I put a little post-it note to myself. We are approaching the end of chapter 2 of Pirkei Avot. God willing, all things being equal, we'll finish the next chapter, the chapter next week, before we head into high holidays, right? This raises two questions. Question the first is, and this is at the pleasure of the group, does the group want to continue on with Pirkei Avot into chapter 3? And there are many there are 6 chapters in all, so we have lots of territory to go if we want to do that. Do we want to, last year around this time, which is when we started Pirkei Avot, and we'd previously been doing something different, so we could use this as a transition time to go into something different. One suggestion that someone made was to look at liturgy, like sort of do some of this kind of analysis that we're doing, but to focus it on parts of the prayer book. Right? And the other question, which is open in my mind a little bit, is when we will, after next week, when we will meet again, because the Rosh Hashanah and
Yom Kippur,
and Sukkot and Shmini Atzeret and Simchas Torah impact a lot of Tuesdays. So it's very possible that we shan't meet again till after all of the holidays, which is fine. So you don't need to give me an answer to any of those questions at the moment, other than I'm planting the seed of the question. I'm going to move the little post-it note to the next set of Mishnayot, and I'll ask again next week, and we can go from there. Okay, so if you have thoughts, don't be bashful. You can be any of the dwarves you want except for bashful.
What page are we on?
Page 242.
Thank you. My brain.
And
How much depth, well, there's depth in all of them. Is it repetitive? Is it a lot of new good stuff if we do chapter 3?
No, it's not, there's not really repetition. I mean, there's certain subjects that sort of come up, somewhat more than once, but you're getting generally a different perspective on it because the speaker is different. So that if I ask the same question of the 5 of you, I would hopefully get some similarity of answers, but very much some differences of answer based on your personal beliefs, thoughts, experiences. Come on, find yourself a comfy spot. Do you want this chair? What do you say? That work for you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
Your job
I
is
know, you're just a sweetie. Yes, you are.
Oh, my decision.
Well, like I said, you don't have to make it now.
Can't we do both?
Um,
Don't hurt me.
Not at the same time.
No, it was just last week when you said, look at the Shema. It never really dawned on me that 3 pages were all Shema.
Yes, so that's part of what I think prompted the suggestion about perhaps looking at liturgy was in fact some of last week's class. But
We could go back to Pirkei Avot after we do liturgy for a couple months.
I think.
I'm happy to do whatever the group wants
Don't
to
you think
do.
liturgy would take more than a couple of months?
Probably.
Give up Pirkei Avot, and I don't want to not have liturgy. So I'm
Well,
gonna
we
give
don't
them up.
have to choose. We can do both.
Yeah, okay, Rabbi, we go to class and class.
Yeah.
Don't kill me.
But don't do one week and one the other.
No,
That would screw
no,
up my head.
no, that would be very, very ungood. Okay,
There's no
Oh,
so
I like that word.
I'm good.
let's jump into our Mishnah for this week. And it is Mishnah number 19 in chapter 2. It is a statement and a teaching by Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar, if you remember way back when, is the fifth of Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai's students. And after his set of teachings, we've been sort of being introduced to each of them. And here I have to give you a little bit of his biography. He was, in many ways, Rabban Yochanan's favorite student, and he seemed destined to a remarkable career. And if you remember when Rabban Yochanan sent his 5 students out, he saw the conclusion drawn by Rabbi Elazar as being encompassing of all the others in a very neat and accessible sort of way. However, Rabbi Elazar goes off to be a teacher of Torah in a somewhat limitedly Jewish environment, but one that is beautifully on the coast of the Mediterranean. All right. And according to the story as it's told in the Talmud, he returns to meet with his fellow colleagues, all of whom are somewhat amazed by the degree to which he has forgotten much of his learning and lost much of his edge, if you will, and erudition. And he sort of becomes the poster child for if you want your learning to endure, you can't take it for granted, right? And that's going to come out a little bit in his teaching, but it is very much sort of he becomes the poster child in rabbinic literature of don't do this.
So is this Eliezer ben Harkanas?
No, this is Elazar ben Arach.
Ah, I get a little confused sometimes to some.
Well, because there's a lot of similar names and a lot of rabbis with the same name, first name.
Right,
It's like saying Rabbi David.
but-
That doesn't narrow it down very much.
But Elazar, which is, some, I guess, one book that I had spelled it one way, and then you have Eleazar, which.
Well, Eliezer and Elazar are actually variants, but not identical names.
Okay. Well, hence my confusion. I said,
Okay.
I was just trying to place the.
Okay, so Rabbi Elazar lives in the early and middle portion of the 2nd century of the Common Era.
Middle portion, okay.
Okay, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai is one of the major leading rabbinic figures at the time of the destruction of the Second Temple in the year 70.
Mhm.
And Rabbi Elazar is one of his students thereafter. So late 1st into the beginning of the 2nd century of the Common Era. Okay. And that too is sort of an important piece of background in that because of the large numbers of soldiers that have been garrisoned and stationed all through the land of Israel, first by the Greeks and then much more so by the Romans, you have a large number of non-Jews living in proximity to Jews, right? So part of the problem for Rabbi Elazar is that not only does he go to a very cushy environment in terms of its physical beauty and yeah, it's kind of nice to lie on the beach and take a little dip in the Mediterranean and blah, blah, blah. But it's also a city that it has a significantly non-Jewish population.
So question is, which one of these is the one that was, had himself put in a coffin and left?
That's Rabbi
Jerusalem?
Yochanan ben Zakkai.
Ben Zakkai, okay, and he went to Yavne, right?
Yeah, he has himself smuggled out of the city. He makes his way into the camp of the Romans
Yeah.
and convinces the then general about to become emperor to allow him to create a house of study in Yavne, in this small town, actually also kind of shore-ish, but not nearly as ritzy as, what are you doing back there?
Psst, I'm looking out the window.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you, Rabbi.
Okay. Okay, so I think that's all I need to give you in terms of preludes, though we're going to come to another digression in a moment. You'll see why. Okay, so what does Rabbi Elazar teach us? He says, be diligent in learning, but specifically be diligent in learning what to respond to a heretic, and know for whom you are toiling and who your employer is. Okay, so how do in Hebrew, the term that's translated in my book is heretic. Is that how it's translated in
Yeah.
yours as well? That's sort of the common translation, but in truth, the Hebrew term is apikoros, right? Which is a corruption of the name of the Greek philosopher Epicurus, right? And in fact, he's probably referring to how do you respond to someone who is a believer in Epicurean thought. All right.
So my question is that heretic usually in the common, way I understand it, usually refers to someone in your own
Okay.
group sort of being that has gone out,
Yes, so we'll come back to heretics in a moment,
Okay.
but I think we have to understand who Epicurus was, or at least understand Epicureanism enough to understand why Rabbi Elazar thinks that you need to be able to rebut someone should you encounter them, because that might actually emerge from his lived experience. Okay, so and I'm going to explain Epicureanism in 3 sentences. So, because I don't want to get too off the beaten track. Epicureanism is a system of philosophy founded in or around 307 before the Common Era, and it was based on the teachings of an ancient Greek philosopher named Epicurus. Epicurus was an atomist and a materialist who followed in the steps of his teachers, most notably Democritus, right? And before you ask me, I will tell you what atomism and materialism mean in this context, right? Atomism comes from the Greek term atomon, meaning uncuttable or indivisible. And it's a natural philosophy that proposes that the physical universe is composed of fundamental, indivisible components known as atoms.
Well, we know better now.
We know better now, but back then, appreciate that this is based on speculation, not proof, right? Because they can't see an atom. They just posit that there are these basic non-divisible building blocks. It took a long time for us to get to the point where we knew that an atom actually had a nucleus that had protons and sometimes neutrons, and that it was
And the
surrounded by electrons.
Yeah.
Right? And yes, I know we've added a great many more things, but fortunately, for me, and probably for you when you went to school, we only had to remember three, as opposed to when my kids were in high school and they had to remember muons and gluons and a whole bunch of other ons. Quarks, yes. So, but for them, the atom was this individual element, right? And that comprised the physical universe was made up of atoms in various combinations, right? Materialism is a form of philosophical monism or oneism in which matter is the fundamental substance in nature, and all things, including our mental states and our consciousness, are a result of material interactions, such that everything is all caused by physical processes such as the neurochemistry of the human brain or the nervous system. Everything is based on physical things. Even if we can't completely identify them, they had the right ideas about certain things, even if they didn't always label them or place them well. Like too much bile, and you were angry. But essentially, philosophical materialism would say that it's all about your chemistry, your makeup. That defines you, right? And that affected his beliefs, and as such, he was prone to religious skepticism, and in general attacked any belief in divine intervention, often referring it to systems of belief as superstitions. Okay, so he was so for our purposes, he's kind of very anti-God, right? The idea of a creator was anathema to him. Okay, so you can see where, entering into a conversation with an Epicurean would have brought two very conflicting worldviews, and my guess is this probably was part of his lived experience, because he was in a especially mixed society, as opposed to staying in the Galilee or in Jerusalem or it's environ, somewhere where everywhere you went, who'd you bump into? You bumped into Jews. That was not his lived experience, right? And so he's saying, Hevei shakud lilmod, be diligent in learning, not just on a basic level, but be diligent in learning so that you know how to respond to a heretic. Right? That requires a level of understanding and knowledge that goes beyond the simple basic. Right? His assertion, or his encouragement, is that it's not just enough to know the basics of Judaism. It's not enough just to know, oh, I do this, I do that, I do the other thing, because
You have to have background.
you have to have background, right? And across the spectrum of stuff, from the macro to the micro. So, for example, and no one should take this personal, right? On Friday night, we light Shabbat candles. And there are people who have done it their entire lives. Just don't ask them why.
Right.
Or what's the messaging? You know, most people would say, oh, that's how the sign of how we start Shabbat, which is correct, but incomplete. So, and you could do that about pretty much anything that we do, especially if we do it almost routinely. It's like putting on a talit. It's automatic. And we say the blessing, and it's automatic. Or we put a kippah on, and it's automatic. But the whys often don't get communicated because we're often too focused on making sure you do it properly. And yeah, we'll feel, yeah, well, the why will come, but it very often does not. And he's saying that you need to know all of those whys. You need to really be immersed in Judaism in order to be able to respond to these kinds of encounters, unless you're prepared to live in isolation. Okay, and whether that's a practical reality is a whole other question. Hold that thought for half a second. I'm just going to grab my tea, which I left steeping over there.
It's been steeped a long time. It's gonna be bitter.
I didn't go anywhere.
It says, I'm in charge of you today.
He's in charge of me pretty much every day. Okay, sit down, sit down. You find a spot.
Okay. This is a little bit of a diversion. About a billion trillion years ago, Norman Thomas, who's a socialist who ran for president repeatedly, came to speak at my high school. And my father said, you've got to go see him. I thought, why? And this withered old man came out to speak. Someone was holding on to somebody, and all of a sudden, he became very dynamic. Totally energized. And one of the things he said is, when you take a stand, you've got to know both sides, because you don't know what the other person's going to come up with, and you can't refute them. Or,
If
you're
you don't have
debating
the
if you
knowledge.
don't have the knowledge or know what they're going to come. So you have to know yours and you have to know theirs. And if learning theirs, that was his little diversion piece, sways you the other way, then aren't you glad you went and studied? That part I wouldn't want to bring up, but it was the part that you had to know what they were coming up with.
And I might even take it, and it's not just my thought, but others as well, who would argue that religion and religiosity should not be fully insulated and isolated from external challenges. It's like a hothouse flower grows well, but doesn't thrive the minute you take it out of that artificial environment. Faith, if it's really strong, learns to cope with the challenges that are inevitable in the real world. And and the challenges may be lived experiences, or the challenges may be questions that come up, ideas that you're confronted with. One of the failures of the American Jewish community can be measured by the amount of success cults have had in preying on young Jews on college campuses. Because they grew up in the hothouse. Nobody ever taught them other isms or ideologies, or how do you respond to, oh, Myron puppy, come here, come here. I know you're sad, I know you want to wander, but you have to come here. Come here.
He's bored.
Yeah, no, if he wanted that kind of OUT, he would he would bark once. So the whining means he's bored and he wants to wander. Come on. Come on. Yes. Come here. So one might even suggest that the confrontations can in fact be beneficial, but only if you have the requisite knowledge and infrastructure to be able to do so. Jonathan Sacks, who was the chief rabbi of England for many, many years, had a great quote: "A faith unchallenged is an ignorant and blind faith." If you can't explain why you are so committed to something, then you may be committed, but you may not know why. And that's a serious problem.
Yeah, because that's how the cults work.
And look, even more mainstream religious communities operate that way to varying degrees. Questions are more welcome in certain faith traditions or elements of faith traditions than they are in others. Remember George Carlin?
Oh, yes.
Right. You ever listen to some of his material on what it was like going to Catholic school?
I don't know if I remember any of it, because he had a long, wide range of all kinds of.
Yes, he did. Oh, yes, he did. But part of what, one of the ones that stuck with me was both how he and his friends would try to come up with the most convoluted, ridiculous questions, just to, harass and annoy their teachers. I truly appreciated that part of him. But also the fact that part of what motivated them to do this was that they couldn't get, or at least in his experience, he couldn't get his questions answered. So I can't ask these questions, so I'll come up with the most insane kinds of things. The one that stuck with me the most was, so if you made your communion and then you crossed the international date line, do you have to do it again?
That's funny.
It's hysterically funny on one level, but it's like that they would answer because it was a practical kind of question. It's sort of like the Jewish version of that is, the astronaut who's orbiting the Earth, when do you put on tefillin? Right? I mean, did you put them on every 90 minutes when you, because every time the sun comes up, okay. And the answer is obviously, no, you don't do that because that's ridiculous. But it's a practical question which ignores completely the why am I putting on tefillin in the first place? Okay. So now let's come back to Sam's question. All right. So I have on my notes here, it says, how do we define and understand the term apikoros? I gave you what was probably the original meaning and intent of Rabbi Elazar's statement. What's the problem that happens relatively quickly or within a couple of centuries?
Give me his statement again.
Okay,
Refresh me.
he says, be diligent in learning what to respond to an Epicurean, which our translation renders as heretic. And Sam correctly noted that it usually refers to someone within the community who has ideas or beliefs that are at variance or at odds with communal norms and standards.
Okay.
Right? A non-believer, if you will. But the reason that model comes in is because a few centuries after Rabbi Elazar, how much interaction did Jews in Babylonia, let's say, have with Epicureans?
Lots.
Actually, none.
They lived in their own community?
Well, A, Jews tended to live somewhat in their own community, but B, that's why I picked Babylonia, because Babylonia was not as influenced by Greek thought as by other beliefs. So they had a lot of encounters with Zoroastrians, who were the predominant population of that part of the world. So, oh, what the heck is an Apikoros? I don't know what the heck an Epicurean is. Was that like someone who likes culinary stuff? No, oh, no, that's not. That's a different term. All right. So part of what happens over time is you have attempts to define what the term means, because I'm not exactly sure. So Rabbeinu Yonah, who lives around the 11th century, defines an apikoros as someone who rejects the oral Torah and makes rulings that contradict established Jewish law. I remind you that, an overarching traditional belief is that when Moses goes up to Sinai, not only does he get the written Torah, asterisk maybe, but he also gets the entirety of the oral tradition, i.e. all the commentaries and discussions that are ever going to happen about the written Torah. Asterisk, probably not. All right, so for him, a heretic is someone who is like a Karaite. The Karaites believed in the Torah, they followed the Torah, but they didn't accept any rabbinic teaching. And so if you're going to make a ruling based on what the Torah says without the accretion of Jewish or layers of rabbinic understanding, you're going to come to a very different conclusion. So, for example, Karaites sat in the dark on Shabbat.
So they were self-isolating.
Well, it's not just self-isolating. It's the Torah says you shall not have a fire in your.
Yeah, but I mean about their community.
Yes, well, and the Jewish community,
the
Jewish community was also happy to isolate them because they didn't care for them. Well, because they were considered heretics because they rejected a central pillar of rabbinic Judaism, which is the Torah is and says what it is that we say it is. All right, and that's a predicate of Judaism, is that Judaism is defined by the rabbinic authorities through history. So even when you're going to today within I'll stick with the conservative movement, for example, if a rabbi wants to assert in a responsum to a question that was never asked before, you go back and you pour through the sources and you try to find bases in existing law for what you want to do. I'll give you trying to think of a good example. I'll use this one. This is all right. In the Ashkenazic world, for almost a 1,000 years, we did not eat legumes on Passover. Why? Because certain rabbis became very, very strict with regard to, well, it might look like chametz or it might be, they were wrong ultimately, but that became normative practice. It was not normative practice in the Sephardic world. But if and I don't have to say when the law committee took up the question about a decade ago as to whether or not Ashkenazic Jews or conservative Jews could eat legumes on Pesach, right? Didn't just look at it and say, yeah, they were wrong. No, it was, let's look at and they pour through all of the rabbinic literature on the subject, and they distill answers down, and they came to a different conclusion, but it was rooted in rabbinic teaching, as opposed to the Karaites, who just basically said rabbinic teaching, throw that into the ocean, we don't do it. Right? So for Rabbeinu Yonah, even though it sounds kind of, rulings that contradict established Jewish law, where you don't have a basis in Jewish law, because ultimately we know that there's a diversity of practice in the Jewish world, not just between Sephardim and Ashkenazim, but within each group, especially within the Ashkenazic world. There are lots of differences of practice, all of which are rooted in some interpretation of rabbinic literature. Bartenura, who lives a few centuries later than Rabbeinu Yonah, Bartenura is like 15th century, defines an apikorus, what we translated as a heretic, as someone who disrespects the Torah and its scholars, treating it as insignificant and disregarding the consequences of their actions. In other words, Torah, what do I care? It's a very different definition. It's a heretic is now sort of someone who is dismissive of Judaism and removes themselves from the community, or puts themselves at odds with standard communal practice. I don't have a great example, though I'm sure there got to be any number of them in modernity. Actually, I have a good example, right? You are a guest at a bar mitzvah, and you arrive in the synagogue, and the person who greets you welcomes you warmly, says, the courtroom is here, the bathrooms are there, the sanctuary is over this way, and when you get to the doors of the sanctuary, someone else will be there to greet you again and direct you. That second person will say, the first person might say, and the talit rack is over here. Okay? With the sort of implied suggestion, you should put one on, right? But if you get to the second person might say, it's our custom for men above the age of bar mitzvah, Jewish men above the age of bar mitzvah, to wear a talit when entering the sanctuary. We have a whole bunch over there, different sizes, styles, colors. Please, take one and put it on. Now, you say, well, I don't do that. Does that make you a heretic or just a jerk? Now, this was actually something that happened, and the guy's going, well, I don't wear talit, then you can't make me. I'm going like, actually, yes, we can, because, eventually I get dragged out of the sanctuary to deal with this fellow. I'm going like, look, if you are a guest in someone's house, and when you enter, they say, please take off your shoes. Do you take off your shoes? Yeah. If they say, please, no smoking in the house, do you smoke? No. Guess what? This is the house of worship of the family who invited you. So keep your shoes on, don't smoke, and put on a talit. That's how you show your respect for both the place and the people who invited you.
And this man was Jewish?
Yeah. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had the conversation, because if he would have said, I'm not Jewish, it would have been like, oh, okay, we don't require it of non-Jewish men. We only require it of Jewish men. And he sat in the lobby for 45 minutes.
Wow.
45 minutes after this conversation to see if
You were gonna break.
we were going to break.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, yes, he is a jerk. But on one level, he's also within the definition Bartenura's definition of a heretic, which is someone who disrespects the Torah and the teachers of Torah, in this case, me, and treats it as unimportant, and I don't care about the consequences.
Last year, we had somebody who was a guest for bar mitzvah, I believe, who wouldn't put on a kippah.
I'm going like, I would use the same exact statement. It's like, you are being disrespectful, not just to the institution, but you're being disrespectful to your hosts. That's really, because that personalizes it. And it's like, you want to use the example of shoes and smoking or anything else? Look, every person has the right to establish the rules of their house. And we are respectful of that, which is appropriate. But I think sometimes people need to be reminded that this is an extension of that. So it's a real challenge. And look, I will tell you that sometimes people coming from a different faith tradition, one of two things happens. Either they're very, very respectful because they've sort of learned to be respectful of religious tradition, or they might say, oh, in my faith tradition, a man doesn't cover his head during worship. In which case you say, okay, I acknowledge that to be true. However, in our house of worship, that is not true. You can disagree respectfully, and then it's a matter of choice. In the same way that if I visit, I'll go for the big one. If I visit the Sistine Chapel, it would be something I would be very intrigued to do. But ultimately, it's a church, right? And this would be true of any church. I wear a kippah, right? It would not be out of line for a docent or someone to say to me, it is our custom for men to not have their head covered in church.
No, they'll let you wear it now.
They will, but the truth of the matter is they could very easily ask me to take it off, and it would be perfectly within their prerogative to do so. I then have two choices. I take off my kippah and stay, or I say thank you very much, and I leave respectfully. Those are the two choices. And it doesn't matter, whether it's the Vatican or St. Bartholomew's up the road or any religious institution, in the same way that when you go into a mosque, you take off your shoes. And if you're going into the sanctuary space, you don't have to take it off if you're going into the kiddush room. That's not what they call it, but it's the same equivalent, right? That's being respectful of the space and place that you are in. And if you're not prepared to do that, don't go. Okay. So heretic very much moves away from its original meaning someone outside who might confront you, and as opposed to someone who's an insider but chooses to reject Torah and its teachings. Right? And then the same some of the same people then talk about, all right, what does it mean to be prepared to confront this heretic, right? How do you correct misinformation? How do you prevent the spread of harmful ideas if, in fact, you don't know what's correct? Right? So this is a fun example. We're talking iconography, right? You know that thing about Jews having
Horns. Yes.
right? And in fact, Michelangelo's Moses,
Poems.
all right? Where does that come from?
I think it's Moses, wasn't it, who had a light of some sort above, and it's depicted
Yeah,
that way as I don't know, they
but,
interpreted it
but,
as
but why not just do a nimbus or an aura if that's what it is? I mean, that's not, I mean, it's a little harder to do in statues, but it's certainly not hard to do in paintings.
Is it a misinterpretation of the language or something, or?
Yes, that's exactly what it is, right? So Sam is right. The Torah tells us that when Moses comes down from his second 40-day encounter with God, the text says kikaran or pnei Moshe, that the skin of Moses's face glowed or shone, right? And it was so brilliant and blinding that the people couldn't handle it, and he would sort of put a mask or a cover, sort of picture a keffiyeh almost, so that it wouldn't radiate outward. Now, I don't have to tell you that the Torah as a document is written without vowels. How you vocalize a word sometimes determines what it means. In the sentence ki karan or pnei Moshe, you need a verb. All right, karan is the verb meaning to shine. Right? But if you vocalize it not that way, but if you vocalize it as a perhaps more familiar word, which is keren. A keren is a horn, like the horn of an animal, antelope, gazelle, cow, bull, whatever, right? So Jerome, when he translates the Bible into Latin and creates the Vulgate, he translates the word Moses, not that Moses's face glowed or shone, but that Moses had horns, right? The Vulgate is the normative Bible, which is used up until really the King James version is rendered in English. So anybody and everybody who's reading the Bible is reading, and I don't know the Latin, so sorry, that's long lost in mists of memory. They're reading, oh, Moses had horns. Ergo, Michelangelo, want to be accurate and authentic to the text, so therefore I will give Moses horns. What happens in the wake of that is who else or what else in Christian iconography has horns? Satan. Demons have horns. So you went from a mistranslation to iconography that gave rise to a whole strand of negative imagery with regard to Jews. Oh, because someone didn't know Hebrew well enough to translate it correctly. Thank you, Jerome. All right, but now step back for a second. I am a Jew living in the Middle Ages. The only way I know that this is wrong is if I know what the original says. And I know that that needs to be a verb, not a noun, because otherwise the sentence doesn't work. And you could, and that is true of a great many things where I need to know what the text says. I need to know what it really means, recognizing that anytime you start to translate something, you skew it sometimes slightly, sometimes significantly. So translators play a very, very powerful role. And then, and sometimes once a mistake is in there, you know as well as I do, once you pronounce something wrong enough times, it's like, oh, I'm never gonna fix that. I always have deep sympathy for B'nai Mitzvah who practice diligently a word, but they practice it wrong, and it's like, no, we got to fix that. And it's like, but, and it's like, I know, but what you're saying means this instead of that, and you don't want to say this. Okay. So it's about having the skill set. And it's interesting because as you get more into modernity, there's more of an acceptance of engaging of engaging with other faith traditions. In the Middle Ages, the Jewish community was very, very happy when, by and large, when the non-Jewish world left them alone, because usually confrontations did not go well. There were, for a period in the Middle Ages, the church set up the disputations between rabbis and priests, and it was a no-win situation because if the rabbi actually defeated the arguments of the priest, then the community was punished. And if he lost, then the priest would go, see, I'm right, therefore you should all convert. Myron, just a very nice man.
It's David, leave him alone.
Early morning.
Shh. Okay, come on, you can relax, it's safe. All right, so, but it's intriguing that, you know, as you get a little bit more into modernity, there's more of so almost a return to Rabbi Al-Azhar's original idea of the consequential, respectful discussion can actually hone your beliefs, can help you better articulate what you believe. You know, having to explain stuff to someone else is really really forces you to be to a level of clarity that you sometimes fudge. I remember years ago, I was asked to teach a class about the different strands within Judaism, you know, conservative, Orthodox, Reform, Reconstructionist, and I spent so I was talking all about the differences because that was sort of the way the topic was presented. And then someone, so what do you all agree about? And I'm going like, okay, perhaps I may have overstated the bifurcations and because I was highlighting the differences and where they came from. And so I sort of stepped back and I said, okay, I'm kind of talking about this part of the book, right? But this part of the book, we're all kind of on the same page. But it's one of those where I don't think about what commonalities we have. There's a sort of a gimme. But for someone coming from the outside, it's like, so how are you connected to each other if there's so many differences? Okay. All right, let's, we have 2 minutes. Dalif Nemiat, know before whom you are toiling and who your employer is, right? Again, because an Epicurean would deny the existence of God because everything is part of an atomistic universe and everything is built on the material and the physical, there is no space in my belief system for a non-corporeal, outside of existence deity. So part of what he is saying is you need to know it, A, to be able to respond to the outside world, but also you need the knowledge in order to appreciate that all this effort that you put forward is in the service of God, and that life has purpose and meaning, and each of us is accountable to God for how purposeful and meaningful our lives are. Very seasonally appropriate Mishnah.
It says that your employer can be relied upon to reward your labors and ours. How did they get that one?
Oh, okay, well, in part because once you introduce the idea of employer, all right, what do you get from your employer?
Pay, wages.
You get paid by your employer, maybe you get health benefits, whatever it is, there's compensation. All right, so Baal Malachtecha so employer is a good translation of that phrase in Hebrew. And so your translation just spells it out in more, a little more bluntly by saying, yeah, not only should you know for whom you are working, but know that your employer is reliable and will pay, right? It leads to a whole discussion, which I'm going to defer to next week because it sort of comes up in next week's Mishnayot, about the question of what is compensation, how do we, and when do we cash in? Okay, so that's the teaser for next time.
Very good.
All righty.